For the victims of the mass stabbing at Westfield Bondi Junction.
On the 13th of April 2024, emergency services rushed to the Westfield Bondi Junction shopping center in Sydney, Australia, after frantic calls reported a violent attacker wielding a large knife inside the busy shopping center. Shoppers and staff fled in panic as the situation escalated within minutes, leaving authorities to confront a scene of both chaos and tragedy. What they discovered would shock not only the local community, but people across Australia and around the world. This is the story of one of the country's most horrifying recent attacks, the 2024 Bondi Junction shopping center stabbing. Before this video starts, this channel is supported by my Patreon. On Patreon, you get uncensored versions of videos, early access to uploads, and shoutouts in future videos. Your support helps fund deeper research and keeps this channel independent. Links are below if you'd like to join. In 1984, Andrew Cauchi and Michelle Cauchi welcomed their first son into the world, naming him Joel Cauchi. Joel was born in Toowoomba, Queensland in Australia. Toowoomba is a city on the border of the southeast Queensland region of Queensland, Australia, having a population of around 140,000 according to the 2021 census. Joel Cauchi was raised in a stable environment. His father, Andrew Cauchi, was believed to have worked in education for a few years before and after Joel was born. Andrew Cauchi had been previously diagnosed with schizophrenia, a severe mental disorder that can affect how a person thinks, feels, and behaves, with schizophrenia also being linked to psychosis, another disorder that often causes you to lose touch with reality. Not much is publicly known about Joel's childhood, as he lived a fairly normal childhood. During Joel's high school years, he attended Harristown State High School, later graduating in the year 2000. He was even top of all of his classes in high school. Around a year after graduating high school, however, when Joel was 17 years old, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia after a psychiatric episode. Following this diagnosis, he was given multiple antipsychotic medication like clozapine. It's also important to note that Joel had also previously been given a diagnosis for obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. His medication would slowly decrease, but then eventually stop by the year 2019, which is when Joel stopped taking his medication outright, which was when his mental health began to seriously deteriorate. During Joel's youth, his parents began to worry about his mental health, but also his growing fascination with knives. This ultimately would be the choice of weapon he would use in the horrific massacre in April of 2024. Following on from his years at high school, he attended the University of Southern Queensland in Toowoomba, finishing his years at university during the mid-2000s. Joel then took up multiple different roles in an attempt at finding a career path he enjoyed. Among these included English tutoring, which he did for a few months. Eventually, Joel would be unemployed, however, and often would sleep in his car. Some reports even suggested that Joel would advertise himself as a male escort online. A few warning signs would be raised during his adult life. Among these included Joel's fixation on knives and violence, with it even being reported that he had a collection of knives that his family often tried to remove from him. As well as this, some evidence shows that Joel shared quite misogynistic opinions in relation to women. This later played a role in the investigation of the attack. Not much is known about Joel's life up until around 2019, which is when Joel stopped taking his medication and started to spiral. This was a turning point where Joel's mental health began to rapidly deteriorate. In 2020, Joel Cauchi left his home in Toowoomba, Queensland and traveled to Brisbane. It was here Joel began to have run-ins with the law. Joel was thrice noticed by police driving erratically. As well as this, he was also reported to police after he made a phone call to a school in order to ask for permission to watch the female students swimming during their sports lessons. No action was taken towards this incident, but it was reported to authorities. Also in 2020, Joel Cauchi began to get increasingly more socially isolated and also started to have unstable thoughts, most likely related to his unmedicated schizophrenia or OCD. It would be around 2021 when Joel Cauchi began to fantasize about knives and violence. In the same year, he even was given a psychiatrist's approval to own a gun. However, he never bought any firearms following on from this. In the same year, his fixation on knives grew, with it being believed he had collected a few different knives that he kept in his home with him. As a result of this, his parents, Andrew and Michelle Cauchi, began to realize that his condition was worsening and that he had stopped taking his medication. Also in 2021, Joel was stopped by police in a routine traffic stop, with the police body cam having been published online.
It wasn't Cauchi's first interaction with police. Pulled over in September 2021 for driving erratically in Brisbane.
What's with you driving, mate?
Someone driving.
Yeah.
So what happened?
I'm describing it as very erratic and unsafe.
He hands over his license, telling him the medical condition listed is schizophrenia.
In January 2023, when Joel was around 39 years old, he moved back to Toowoomba, Queensland from Brisbane and moved back in with his parents. In the same month he moved back in with his parents, Joel made a phone call to the Queensland Police Department after getting into a heated altercation with his father, who tried to take away his knife collection from him. Police on the scene would speak to Joel, with this all being caught on police body cam.
My dad has taken some of my property. It's pretty expensive. And he won't give it back. I tried to resolve it, and he will not return it, and I can't really afford a replacement.
What kind of property are we talking?
Knives.
Knives, yep.
So there's like a US Army knife for 3 or so.
In the same year, Joel was stopped by police as he was acting suspicious. He was later let go, and this was his final run-in with the police. Whilst Joel was living with his parents, he became increasingly more paranoid and delusional. His parents noted that he started to believe that demons had control of him, and that the paranormal were speaking to him. Whilst living at his parents' home, he started researching mass killings online, and began to idolize mass killers, this being a common theme when I'm discussing these cases. In March 2024, Joel left his family home once again and traveled to Sydney. It would be at this point, 1 month before the massacre, that he began to plan the attack. This move to Sydney was believed to have been a last-minute choice and wasn't really planned. It was at this point that he was living in his car and was homeless, sometimes staying in different hostels around Sydney. During his time being in and out of hostels, Joel was described as floridly psychotic. Reports claim he heard voices, had hallucinations, and was delusional. It was in the same month Joel began to advertise himself online as a male escort, possibly in an attempt at making some money, and less than a week before the massacre, Joel posted on a Bondi community page in which he asked for anyone that he could surf with in Bondi. A week later, however, on the 14th of April 2024, Australia, as well as the rest of the world, would learn the news of one of, if not, the most horrific mass stabbings that the world had ever seen. On the 14th of April 2024, at around 3:10 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, Joel Cauchi entered the Westfield Bondi Junction shopping center. He spent 12 minutes inside and later exited the shopping center at around 3:22 p.m., with witnesses describing him having a 30cm or 12-inch knife in his backpack. 10 minutes later, at 3:32 p.m., Joel Cauchi re-entered the shopping center and was in a queue for a sourdough bakery. Standing in front of him was 25-year-old Dawn Singleton, who was an e-commerce assistant. Joel reached into his bag, which held the 12-inch knife, taking it out. Before he then stabbed her, she died on the scene. He moved south of the bakery and attacked 47-year-old Jade Young, killing her as well. Cauchi then saw another woman outside of the AJE Athletica store and tried attacking her. She was injured during this incident and luckily survived. 20 seconds following this, Cauchi noticed 27-year-old university student Cheng Yi Xuan outside of a Peter Alexander store. He then stabbed her as well, killing her on the scene. So far, Joel had killed 3 different women in a minute. Cauchi then went on to stab a woman who was standing outside of a Cotton On retailer, and also another woman stood near a Lululemon clothing store. Both victims went on to survive, luckily. 29 seconds later, 2 security guards working at the shopping center reported the attack. They began to walk toward the bakery, where Cauchi had previously stabbed both Dawn Singleton and Jade Young. Cauchi then attacked a woman standing inside a Kukai clothing store. She luckily survived. Joel then briefly entered a Meijer store, where he went on to stab another woman. She also luckily survived the attack. At 3:34 p.m., he ran out of the Meijer store and stabbed 38-year-old Ashley Good, who was outside of the AJE Athletica store with her 9-month-old daughter. As Ashley Good staggered away, Joel began stabbing her 9-month-old daughter as well. Ashley ran back in order to stop him, but he stabbed her once again, leaving leaving her in critical condition. He started to run away following this, subsequently leaving the 9-month-old daughter with heavy injuries. Luckily, however, the 9-month-old went on to survive. 20 seconds later, Cauchi ran back towards a sourdough bakery and stabbed 2 security guards. 30-year-old Faraz Tahir was killed, whilst his co-worker, Mohammed Taha, went on to survive. Cauchi continued running north through the shopping center, stabbing 2 women in doing so. However, both survived the attack. As he made his way north, he saw 55-year-old Pikriya Darchia standing outside of a Chanel boutique store. He stabbed and killed her. Following on from this, he moved down to the 3rd floor and stabbed another woman outside of a Zimmerman store. Cauchi then ran around the 3rd floor and tried to access the 4th floor through an elevator. 2 men on the escalator rescued a woman and blocked it off with bollards. Eventually, the 2 men threw the bollards at Cauchi before fleeing the mall. At this point, 3 minutes after the attack had begun, emergency services were called to the scene, following multiple reports of people being stabbed. Law enforcement evacuated the building, rerouting public transport in the area as well. Around 40 ambulances were deployed to the scene. Police officer Amy Scott was in her car at the time of the attack and was alerted to the situation. Amy had been close to the scene anyways, so she rushed toward the shopping center, arriving at 3:37 p.m. She was the first officer on the scene. Cauchi, at this point, traveled to the 5th floor, whilst Amy Scott followed him. A minute later, Cauchi began to run, with civilians and Amy Scott chasing him to the shopping center. Whilst running, he lunged at multiple different people, however, did not stab them. This was all caught on CCTV. At 3:38 p.m., Cauchi noticed Amy Scott chasing him and began running towards her. Officer Amy Scott then retrieved her firearm and shot Cauchi multiple times, killing him on the scene. As he collapsed to the floor, she kicked the knife away and began to perform CPR on him. However, he died. Just like that, the attack was over. 6 people sadly lost their lives, with over a dozen more injured. My thoughts and prayers are with all the families and friends of anyone affected in this tragedy. Rest in paradise. At 6:15 p.m., New South Wales police issued a statement, initially reporting that 5 people had been killed in the attack, whilst others had been rushed to hospital. Among the injured was a 9-month-old girl, as well as her mother, Ashley Good, who sadly died in the hospital. It was at this point that a huge investigation was launched into the attack, and what was uncovered showed a plethora of warning signs and mental health issues that had been ignored. The investigation into the attack began almost immediately after the scene was secured, and what authorities uncovered in the hours, days, and weeks that followed painted a deeply disturbing picture of missed warning signs, systemic gaps, and a man who had been steadily unraveling for years. Detectives from New South Wales Police, alongside counterterrorism units, initially worked to determine whether the attack had any ideological motive. However, it quickly became apparent that this was not an act of terrorism in the conventional sense, but rather the actions of a severely mentally unwell individual acting alone. As they traced Joel Cauchi's movements leading up to the attack, investigators reviewed CCTV footage across Sydney, mapping his final weeks in forensic detail, from his stays in hostels to nights spent sleeping in his car, and even his presence in local communities where he attempted to interact with others. Interviews were conducted with hostel staff and residents who described Cauchi as increasingly erratic, withdrawn, and at times visibly disconnected from reality, with some recalling unsettling conversations and behavior that, in hindsight, appeared to be clear indicators of a psychotic state. Police also examined his digital footprint, uncovering online activity that included searches related to violence, mass killings, and disturbing ideations, alongside evidence of his attempts to contact women through escort advertisements and community groups, further supporting the theory that his attack may have been partially influenced by misogynistic fixations. Perhaps most alarming for investigators was the timeline surrounding his mental health treatment. Records confirmed that Cauchi had been diagnosed with schizophrenia as a teenager and had been prescribed antipsychotic medication for years, yet had ceased taking it entirely by 2019, a decision that marked the beginning of a sharp and sustained decline. Authorities liaised closely with his family, who revealed their growing concern over his deteriorating condition.
I'm extremely sorry. I'm heartbroken for you. Look, this is so horrendous that I can't even explain it. You're trying to get me to give you an intelligent conversation. I can't do it because I'm just devastated.
His paranoia, delusions involving supernatural forces, and, crucially, his long-standing obsession with knives, an obsession they had actively tried to manage by removing weapons from him in the past. The investigation also scrutinized prior interactions with law enforcement, including reports of erratic driving, inappropriate behavior, and concerning phone calls, all of which, while documented, had not resulted in any substantial intervention. This raised serious questions about whether earlier action, whether through mental health services, law enforcement, or community reporting, could have altered the course of events. As forensic teams analyzed the crime scene, they confirmed that Cauchi had acted with speed and randomness, but not without pattern, noting that the overwhelming majority of his victims were women, reinforcing suspicions about his underlying motives. In the aftermath, a broader inquiry was launched, not only into the attack itself, but into the systems that had failed to prevent it, focusing on mental health care gaps, information sharing between agencies, and the challenges of managing individuals with severe psychiatric conditions living independently. This brings me to the end of this video. If you enjoyed this video, there is a high chance you will enjoy my other videos, so make sure you subscribe and check out my other videos.